The great hall of the Galactic Concord was silent. 12 species filled the massive chamber, their representatives seated in a perfect circle around the center platform. Lights of different colors floated above each delegation, marking their worlds of origin. At the heart of the circle stood a single human man. Admiral Dohayan Khan kept his back straight and his face empty of emotion. He wore the white uniform of Earth's United Fleet, medals covering his chest. Behind him, through the transparent walls of the station, he could see Earth itself. Blue and green and beautiful. Home to 12 billion souls who were waiting to learn their fate. The Vorian High Speaker rose from his seat. Melos was tall and thin, with gray skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His four eyes blinked slowly as he lifted a crystal tablet and began to read. The Galactic Concord has reached a unanimous decision regarding the species known as humanity, Melos announced. His voice echoed through the hall. After careful study of human history, psychology, and behavior patterns, we have determined that humans represent an unacceptable threat to galactic peace. Dohayan did not move. He had expected this. Humans are aggressive by nature, Melos continued. They war among themselves constantly. They develop weapons faster than they develop wisdom. They expand without consideration for others. They cannot be trusted to join our community. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the delegations. Dohayan noticed that only the Kalari representative remained silent, her silver eyes fixed on the floor. Therefore, Melos said, the Concord has voted to exile humanity to the Hollow Reach. Now Dohayan's composure cracked. His hands formed fists at his sides. The Hollow Reach was a cluster of dying stars at the edge of the galaxy. Nothing lived there. Nothing could live there. It was not exile. It was a death sentence delivered slowly. You have one cycle to prepare your population for transport, Melos finished. Concord vessels will escort your ships to ensure compliance. This decision is final. Dohayan finally spoke. His voice was calm and cold. You will regret this, Mercy. Melos tilted his head. Mercy? We are sparing your species from destruction. You should be grateful. You call sending us to die in the dark mercy? Dohayan asked. You could have killed us quickly. Instead, you choose to watch us fade away over generations. That is not mercy. That is cruelty dressed in kind words. The decision is made, Melos repeated. Dohayan smiled then. It was not a pleasant smile. Yes. It is. And, one day, when your great-grandchildren ask why humanity came for them, you can tell them it was because of this moment. Because you thought we would simply accept our grave and lie down in it. He turned and walked out of the hall. No one stopped him. 3 weeks later, Commander Una Park stood on the bridge of the transport vessel Hope of Soul. Through the viewport, she watched Earth grow smaller with every passing second. Around her, thousands of other ships filled the void. Old vessels. Broken vessels. Ships that should have been retired decades ago. The Concord had not given humanity their best technology for this journey. They had given them barely enough to survive the trip. Una's daughter stood beside her. Nari was only 8 years old, but she understood what was happening. She had stopped crying 2 days ago. Now she simply watched with dry eyes as her world disappeared. Mama, Nari said quietly, will we ever come back? Una knelt down and took her daughter's hands. Yes, she said. I promise you, Nari. One day, we will return. And, when we do, they will kneel before us. Nari nodded slowly. She did not fully understand, but she believed her mother. She would always believe her mother. The journey to the Hollow Reach took 4 months. 17 ships were lost along the way. Engine failures. Life support malfunctions. Accidents that could have been prevented with proper equipment. The Concord escort vessels watched these deaths happen and did nothing to help. When the convoy finally arrived at their destination, General Tehoshin was the first to survey their new home. He stood in the observation deck of the command ship and looked out at 7 barren worlds orbiting a dying red sun. The planets were gray and lifeless. No water. No atmosphere worth breathing. No resources visible from orbit. His aide, a young lieutenant named Minji-Oh, stood beside him. Her face was pale with despair. "Sir," she whispered, "how are we supposed to survive here? There is nothing. This is nothing but rocks and dust." Taeho was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to smile. "Lieutenant," he said, "do you know why the Concorde fears us?" Minji shook her head. "They fear us because we are too stubborn to die when we should," Taeho explained. "They fear us because we build cities in deserts and farms on mountains. They fear us because we look at the impossible and say we will do it anyway." He gestured at the barren worlds before them. "They sent us here to die. They expected us to give up. But they forgot one thing about humans." "What is that, sir?" "We do not give up." Taeho turned to face her. "We adapt. We overcome. We find a way. And, when there is no way, we make one." He placed his hand on her shoulder. "The Concorde sees a grave out there. I see a forge. A place where we will hammer ourselves into something stronger than we ever were before." Minji looked out at the dead worlds again. This time, she tried to see them through the general's eyes. "It will take generations," she said. "Then, it takes generations," Taeho replied. "Our children will continue what we start. And their children after them. We will build something out here in the darkness. Something the galaxy has never seen. And, one day, we will return to show them what their exile created." The first colony ships landed on the largest planet that same day. They named it New Dawn. Within a week, the first underground shelters were complete. Within a month, the first mining operations began. Within a year, the first child was born on New Dawn soil. Her name was Hannah. She was the first of a new generation. A generation born in exile. A generation that would grow up knowing nothing but the dream of return. And, across the galaxy, the Concorde celebrated. They believed the human problem was solved. They believed humanity would fade away in the hollow reach, forgotten and broken. They were wrong. In the darkness at the edge of the galaxy, humanity was not dying. They were waiting. They were building. They were remembering. And they would never, ever forget. 50 years after the exile, Minji-Oh made a discovery that would change everything. She was no longer a young lieutenant. Her hair had turned gray and her face carried the lines of 5 decades of struggle. But her mind was sharper than ever. She had spent her entire life studying the dying sun that lit their prison worlds. Everyone said it was impossible to harvest useful energy from a star so close to death. Everyone said they should focus on other solutions. Minji did not listen to everyone. She stood in her laboratory deep beneath New Dawn's surface, surrounded by screens filled with calculations. Her team had gone home hours ago. Only she remained, staring at numbers that should not have made sense but did. "It works," she whispered to the empty room. "By all the stars above and below, it actually works." She had found a way to extract energy from dying stars. Not just a little energy. Massive amounts of energy. More power than humanity had ever controlled in its entire history on Earth. The Concorde had declared this technology impossible 3,000 years ago and never looked at it again. But the Concorde had never been desperate enough to try everything. Within 5 years, the first forge station was built in orbit around their dying sun. It was ugly and crude, held together with salvaged parts and desperate hope. But, when Minji pressed the activation button, it worked perfectly. Energy flowed into their colony worlds like blood into a dying body. Everything changed after that. The barren worlds began to transform. Underground cities expanded. Factories came to life. Ships were built. Real ships. Warships. Exploration vessels. The kind of technology the Concorde had forbidden them from having. General Taeho Shin did not live to see it. He died 30 years after the exile, worn out by the endless work of keeping humanity alive. But, before he died, he created something that would outlast him. He called it the doctrine of return. Every human child learned the doctrine from the moment they could understand words. It was simple. It was clear. It was absolute. One day, humanity would return to the galaxy that had cast them out. One day, they would make the Concorde answer for what they had done. One day, they would take their rightful place among the stars. Not as equals. As rulers. 150 years after the exile, Fleet Commander Jiho Beck led the first Shadow Fleet into the unknown. Jiho was tall and quiet, with eyes that missed nothing. He had been born on New Dawn, like his parents before him. He had never seen Earth. He had never met anyone who had. But, he knew the stories. He knew what had been taken from his people. And, he knew his purpose. His fleet of 50 ships slipped through a wormhole that their scientists had discovered 10 years earlier. The Concorde did not know this wormhole existed. They did not know that hundreds of similar passages connected the dark regions of the galaxy. They did not know that the Hollow Reach was not a dead end, but a doorway. On the other side of the wormhole, Jiho found paradise. A system with 3 habitable worlds. Blue oceans. Green forests. Clean air. Everything the Hollow Reach was not. And, it was completely empty. The Concorde had never mapped this region. They had assumed nothing of value existed beyond their borders. They were very, very wrong. Jiho sent a message back to New Dawn. 3 words only. Found our future. The colonization began immediately. Ships full of settlers made the journey through the wormhole. Then, another wormhole was found. And another. And another. Each one led to more uncharted systems. More empty worlds waiting to be claimed. Humanity spread through the shadows of the galaxy like water through cracks in stone. Silent. Invisible. Unstoppable. The Concorde never noticed. They had forgotten about the exiles decades ago. Their sensors did not cover the dark regions. Their patrols never went near the Hollow Reach. Why would they? There was nothing there but dead worlds and dead humans. At least, that was what they believed. 300 years after the exile, Hannah Yun stood before the assembly of the human dominion. She was 60 years old, with silver hair and eyes that burned with cold fire. She was the great-granddaughter of Commander Unipark and the granddaughter of little Nari who had watched Earth disappear through a viewport 3 centuries ago. The blood of the exile flowed in her veins. The dreams of her ancestors lived in her heart. And, today, she had been elected Supreme Chancellor of Humanity. The assembly hall was vast. Representatives from 47 worlds filled the seats. 47 hidden colonies spread across the dark regions of the galaxy. 90 billion humans living in secret, building in secret, preparing in secret. Hannah looked out at her people and felt the weight of 300 years pressing on her shoulders. My fellow humans, she began, today we stand at a crossroads. For 3 centuries, we have hidden. We have built. We have grown strong. Our fleet now numbers 10,000 warships. Our technology has surpassed anything the Concorde possesses. Our people are united by a single purpose that has been passed down from parent to child since the day of our exile. She paused, letting the silence fill the hall. The time is coming, she continued. Soon, very soon, we will step out of the shadows. We will reveal ourselves to the galaxy that tried to kill us. We will show them what their cruelty created. A murmur of excitement rippled through the assembly. But, we will not strike blindly, Hannah said. We will not rush. We have waited 300 years. We can wait a little longer. When we move, it will be with absolute precision. When we strike, it will be with overwhelming force. When we reveal ourselves, the Concord will realize that their greatest fear has come true. She raised her fist. They tried to bury us. They did not realize they were planting seeds. And now those seeds have grown into a forest that will swallow them whole. The assembly erupted in cheers. The sound echoed through the hall and seemed to shake the very walls. Hannah stood silent at the center of it all, thinking of her great-grandmother Una. Thinking of the promise made to a little girl 3 centuries ago. We will return. And they will kneel. The promise was about to be kept. Somewhere in the bright regions of the galaxy, the Concord continued their peaceful existence. They held their assemblies. They passed their laws. They celebrated their unity. They had no idea that in the darkness beyond their borders, an empire larger than their own was preparing for war. They had no idea that humanity remembered everything. And humanity never forgives. Captain Tellen had served the Vorian fleet for 40 years. He had seen many strange things in his time among the stars. He had explored dead worlds and living ones. He had met species the Concord had never contacted before. He thought nothing could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. His scout vessel, the Seeker of Truth, had been sent to map an uncharted system at the edge of Concord space. It was supposed to be a routine mission. Fly in, scan the planets, fly out. Simple work for an old captain waiting for retirement. The system was not empty. Tellen's 4 eyes went wide as his sensors painted a picture he could not understand. A planet full of life. Cities covering every continent. Orbital stations circling above. Ships moving between the planet and its moons. Billions of life signs. And the signals coming from those cities were unmistakably human. That is impossible, Tellen whispered. The humans are dead. They have been dead for centuries. His communications officer turned to face him. Sir, should we report this to command? Before Tellen could answer, his tactical display screamed a warning. Ships were approaching. Many ships. He watched in horror as vessel after vessel appeared on his sensors. 100. 200. 300 warships, surrounding his tiny scout craft in perfect formation. Human warships. His communication screen flickered to life. A human face appeared. A man with sharp features and cold eyes, wearing a black uniform covered in metals Tellen did not recognize. Captain Tellen, the human said calmly. I am Admiral Saiwahan of the Human Dominion Navy. You have entered our space without permission. Tellen's mouth moved but no words came out. His mind could not process what he was seeing. The Human Dominion? How was this possible? Where had these ships come from? How had the Concord missed an entire civilization? Admiral Saiwa waited patiently for the Vorian to find his voice. This cannot be real, Tellen finally managed. You were exiled. You were sent to the Hollow Reach. Nothing can survive there. Saiwu smiled. It was not a friendly smile. You thought you were sending us to die. Instead, you sent us somewhere the Concord would never look. You gave us 300 years to build without interference. He gestured at the fleet surrounding the Vorian ship. This is what we built. Tellen looked at his sensors again. 300 warships. Each one larger and more advanced than anything in his own fleet. And this was just one system. If the humans had spread to other systems. How many? Tellen asked. How many worlds do you control? More than you can imagine, Saiwu replied. More than the Concord itself. And we have been waiting a very long time for this moment. What moment? The moment when you found us. Saiwu leaned forward. You see, Captain, we were planning to reveal ourselves soon anyway. Your arrival simply moves our schedule forward a little. And now you have a choice. You can come with us peacefully and witness what humanity has become. Or you can try to run, and my ships will turn you to dust before you travel a single light second. Tellen knew he had no choice at all. 3 days later, Melos IV received the worst news of his life. He was the High Speaker of the Vorian people, just as his ancestors had been for generations. He ruled from the same chamber where his great-grandfather had sentenced humanity to exile 3 centuries ago. He had grown up believing that decision had saved the galaxy. He had been told the humans were long dead. The intelligence report in his hands told a different story. The human dominion controlled over 50 colonized systems. Their population exceeded 90 billion. Their fleet numbered more than 10,000 warships. Their technology was at least a century ahead of anything the Concord possessed. They had weapons the Concord scientists could not even understand. And they had been preparing for war since the day of their exile. Melos felt his hands shake as he read the final section of the report. Human agents had been discovered in Concord space. Spies who had lived among the 12 species for decades. Sleeper cells planted in governments, militaries, and corporations. The humans had not just been building ships. They had been studying their enemies. Learning their weaknesses. Planning their revenge. How did we miss this? Melos whispered. How did we not know? His advisor stood nearby, her face pale with fear. They stayed in the dark regions, High Speaker. Areas we never thought to monitor. By the time they started expanding into our space, they had already built an empire larger than ours. Before Melos could respond, every screen in the chamber flickered. The lights went out. And, then, a face appeared on every display. A human face. Chancellor Hanayun looked out from the screens with eyes that held 300 years of anger. Leaders of the Galactic Concord, she said. I am speaking to you from across the void you cast us into. I am speaking on behalf of 90 billion humans who have lived and died in exile because of your fear. Melos tried to deactivate the transmission. Nothing worked. The humans had complete control of his systems. 300 years ago, Hannah continued, your ancestors decided that humanity was too dangerous to exist among you. They were right. We are dangerous. But, not because we are aggressive or violent by nature. We are dangerous because we never stop. We never give up. We never forget. Her image seemed to grow larger, more intense. You sent us to the hollow reach expecting us to die. We did not die. We multiplied. We evolved. We watched you grow comfortable and lazy in your peace while we sharpened ourselves against the darkness. You called us a threat. You were more right than you knew. Melos realized he could not breathe. His hearts were beating too fast. And, now, children of the Concord, we return. Not as refugees begging for a place at your table. Not as prisoners seeking mercy. We return as conquerors. We return as the masters of the galaxy you tried to deny us. Hannah paused, letting her words sink in. You have 30 of your standard cycles to surrender unconditionally to the human dominion. Every world. Every fleet. Every resource. All of it becomes ours. In exchange, we will allow your species to continue existing as protectorates under our rule. Her eyes seemed to look directly at Melos. If you refuse, or if you try to fight, we will crush you. Not quickly. Not mercifully. We will dismantle everything you have built over the last 10,000 years. We will turn your capitals to ash and your fleets to debris. We will make you understand the price of what your ancestors did to us. She smiled then. A terrible smile. This is not a negotiation. This is not a discussion. This is a warning. The only one you will receive. Choose wisely. The screens went dark. Melos sat in silence for a long moment. Then, he called for an emergency session of the full Concord Assembly. He still believed they could win. He still believed that 12 species united could defeat one. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The Concord Assembly voted to fight. They believed they could win. 12 species against one. 800 billion people against 90 billion. Surely the numbers would favor them. Surely their combined strength would be enough. They were fools. Grand Admiral Juno Ryu received the news with something close to joy. He had waited his entire life for this moment. His grandfather had been a soldier during the exile. His father had spent 50 years building the ships that now filled human space. 3 generations of his family had lived for nothing but this war. Now it was finally here. Juno stood on the bridge of his flagship, the HSS Remembrance. It was the largest warship humanity had ever built. 3 kilometers long, armed with weapons the Concorde could not even imagine. Around it, the first Shadow Fleet formed a wall of metal and fire. 2,000 ships ready to bring humanity's vengeance to the galaxy. His first target was obvious. Voria Prime. The homeworld of the species that had proposed human exile 3 centuries ago. The Vorians had cast the first vote against humanity. They would be the first to fall. The jump to Vorian space took seconds. Human wormhole technology was far beyond anything the Concorde possessed. One moment the first Shadow Fleet was in human territory. The next, they were in orbit above Voria Prime. The Vorian Grand Armada was waiting for them. 8,000 ships. The largest fleet the Vorians had assembled in 1,000 years. Every vessel they could spare had been sent to defend their homeworld. Admiral Juno looked at the enemy formation and felt nothing but contempt. "All ships," he said calmly, "begin attack." The battle lasted 16 hours. It should not have been a battle at all. It was a massacre. Human weapons tore through Vorian shields like paper. Human ships moved faster, turned quicker, and hit harder than anything the Vorians had ever faced. The Grand Armada that was supposed to save their world crumbled piece by piece. Juno watched it all from his command chair. Every time a Vorian ship exploded, he thought of the exile. Every flash of fire was payment for 300 years of suffering. Every Vorian life lost was interest on a debt that could never truly be repaid. When the final Vorian warship fell, Juno stood and walked to the viewport. Below him, Voria Prime turned slowly, its orbital defenses now silent and destroyed. The Vorian people looked up at human ships filling their sky and knew their world would never be the same. "This is for our grandparents who died in the Hollow Reach," Juno said quietly. "This is for every child who grew up knowing only exile. This is for every dream that was stolen from us." He turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to the surface. They have 12 hours to surrender completely. If they do not, we will begin landing troops." They surrendered in 6. Across the galaxy, the war continued. Intelligence Director Era Choi did not command fleets. Her weapons were secrets and shadows. For over a century, she had built a network of human agents throughout Concorde space. Spies who had lived entire lives among alien species. Sleeper cells waiting for the signal to activate. When the war began, Era gave that signal. Governments fell overnight. Leaders who had been secretly working for humanity revealed themselves. Military officers sabotaged their own fleets. Supply lines collapsed as key personnel disappeared. The Concorde found itself fighting enemies within and without. Era watched her screens as reports flooded in from every corner of the galaxy. A Concorde shipyard destroyed by its own workers. A planetary defense grid shut down from the inside. An entire fleet refusing to fight because their commanders had been human agents for decades. This was not just a war of ships and soldiers. This was a war that had been planned for 300 years. Every move the Concorde made, humanity had predicted. Every strategy they tried, humanity had already countered. The Concorde never had a chance. Not every species supported the war against humanity. The Kalari had voted against the exile 3 centuries ago. They had been the only ones to speak in humanity's defense. The Concorde had punished them for it, limiting their influence and excluding them from key decisions. Now, Elder Ven of the Kalari Council made a choice that would save her people. She contacted Chancellor Hannah directly. "We never wanted this," Ven said, her silver eyes filled with old guilt. "We tried to stop the exile. We failed. But we never forgot what was done to your people." Hannah studied the alien woman for a long moment. The Kalari were not strong enough to change the war. Their fleets were small. Their worlds were few. But they represented something important. They represented the possibility of mercy. "You remembered us when others tried to forget," Hannah said finally. "You spoke for us when no one else would. The human dominion does not forget its enemies. But we also do not forget our friends." She offered the Kalari an alliance. Full protection. Continued independence. A voice in the new order that was coming. The Kalari accepted immediately. News of the alliance spread through the Concord like fire. If humanity could show mercy to those who had shown mercy to them, perhaps surrender was not the end. Perhaps survival was possible. The remaining Concord species began to splinter. Some wanted to fight to the death. Others wanted to surrender and hope for the best. The unity that had held 12 species together for millennia cracked and shattered. Fleet Marshal Yunbai Khan led the final assault. She was a descendant of Admiral Dohayan Kong, the man who had stood before the Concord Assembly and promised that humanity would return. She carried his blood in her veins and his words in her heart. Concord Prime lay before her. The capital of the coalition. The seat of power for 12 species. 30,000 ships had gathered to defend it. Every vessel the Concord could spare from across the galaxy. Their last stand. Their final hope. Yunbai commanded a force of 6,000 human warships. She was outnumbered 5-1. It did not matter. The battle began at dawn according to Concord Prime's local time. By sunset, it was over. Human technology, human tactics, and 3 centuries of pure determination proved unstoppable. The Concord fleet broke and scattered. Those who did not surrender were destroyed. Yunbai's ships descended through the atmosphere. Human soldiers landed on Concord Prime for the first time in history. They landed not as visitors or refugees. They landed as conquerors. As her boots touched the soil of the enemy capital, Yunbai thought of her ancestor. Dohayan had promised that the Concord would regret their mercy. He had promised that humanity would return. 300 years later, standing on the ashes of Concord power, Yunbai whispered to his memory. "We kept our promise, grandfather. We came back." And they kneel. The war was over. Humanity had won. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord had not changed in 300 years. The same lights floated above each delegation seat. The same transparent walls showed the stars beyond. The same platform stood at the center where Admiral Dohayan Kong had once received humanity's sentence. But everything else was different. Melas IV knelt on that platform now. His gray skin had turned pale with fear and shame. His 4 eyes were fixed on the floor. Around him, the leaders of the remaining Concord species knelt in a circle. 11 species brought low. 11 peoples who had once ruled the galaxy together. Chancellor Hannah Yun walked among them slowly. She wore a gown of pure white, the same color as the uniform Dohayan had worn when he stood in this very hall centuries ago. Her silver hair was pulled back from her face. Her eyes held no mercy. Behind her, human soldiers lined the walls. Human ships filled the space beyond the viewport. Human flags hung from every surface. The Concord was no more. The human dominion had taken its place. Hannah stopped in front of Melas. She looked down at the descendant of the man who had condemned her ancestors to exile. 300 years ago, she said, your great-grandfather stood where I stand now. He looked at my people and saw a threat. He decided we were too dangerous to live among you. He thought sending us to die in the darkness would solve his problem. Melas said nothing. There was nothing he could say. He was wrong, Hannah continued. Not about us being dangerous. We are dangerous. We are the most dangerous thing this galaxy has ever seen. He was wrong to think he could destroy us by casting us out. He should have killed us when he had the chance. That was his mistake. A mistake you will now pay for. She gestured, and a human officer brought forward a document. The terms of surrender. Total submission to human rule. Every world, every fleet, every resource belonging to the Dominion. The former Concord species would become protectorates, allowed to govern themselves in local matters but answering to human authority in all things. Sign, Hannah said simply. Melos looked at the document. His hands shook as he took the pen. He knew that with his signature, 10,000 years of Vorian history would end. His people would become servants of the species they had tried to destroy. He signed anyway. He had no choice. One by one, the other leaders did the same. 11 signatures. 11 surrenders. 11 species bowing to human dominance. When the last signature was complete, Hannah took the document and held it up for all to see. It is done, she announced. The Galactic Concord is no more. In its place rises the human dominion. From this day forward, humanity rules the stars. The human soldiers cheered. The sound echoed through the hall where humanity had once been condemned. Hannah turned back to the kneeling aliens. You feared what we might become if given freedom, she said. So we built in chains what you could not build in paradise. You created the very monster you feared. Remember that, as you serve us for the next 1,000 years. 3 months later, Hannah Yoon stood in a different hall on a different world. This was the capital of the human dominion, built on a planet that had been discovered during the Shadow Years. Billions of humans watched as she prepared to take on a new title. No longer Chancellor. Now something more. The crown they placed on her head was forged from metal salvaged from the first exile ships. The same vessels that had carried humanity to the Hollow Reach 3 centuries ago. A reminder of where they had come from. A symbol of what they had overcome. I crown you Empress Hannah I, the ceremony master announced. Ruler of the human dominion. Sovereign of all charted space. Guardian of humanity's future. Hannah looked out at her people. The descendants of exiles. The children of survivors. The inheritors of a dream that had been born in darkness and despair. We are no longer prisoners, she said. We are no longer refugees. We are no longer the forgotten species cast out to die. Today, we are the masters of the galaxy. And we will never let anyone take that from us again. 6 months after the coronation, Admiral Sai Wuhan was given a special mission. He was old now. His hair had turned white and his joints ached from decades of service. But, when Empress Hannah offered him this task, he accepted without hesitation. It was the mission he had been waiting for his entire life. His fleet jumped to a system that had been empty for 300 years. A single blue and green world orbited a yellow sun. Earth. The homeworld of humanity. The place where everything had started. Saiwo landed near the ruins of what had once been called Seoul. 3 centuries of neglect had allowed nature to reclaim the city. Trees grew through cracked streets. Animals wandered through empty buildings. But, somewhere beneath the green, the bones of human civilization remained. He knelt on the soil of his ancestors and wept. Grandmother, he whispered, thinking of stories passed down through generations. We promised we would return. We promised they would kneel. He looked up at the sky where human ships now filled orbit. We kept our promises. Earth was declared a protected monument. No one would ever live there again. But every human child would learn about it. Every human would know the story of the exile and the return. The planet would stand forever as a reminder of what had been lost and what had been reclaimed. 1 year after the war ended, Empress Hannah commissioned a statue to be built on Earth. It stood where the Assembly of the United Nations had once met, before the exile, before the Hollow Reach, before everything changed. The statue showed a human hand reaching upward, fingers spread wide to grasp the stars above. It was made of metal from Vorian warships, melted down and reformed into something new. A symbol of triumph. A monument to revenge. The inscription at its base was simple: they cast us into darkness, expecting us to fade. Instead, we became the dark, and the dark consumed them all. 500 years passed. The human dominion expanded beyond the borders of the old Concord. Former enemy species had become loyal protectorates. Some had even begun to take pride in serving the empire that had conquered them. Time heals many wounds, even wounds of war. But humanity never forgot. The story of the exile was taught in every school. The names of the first exiles were remembered. The promise of return was celebrated every year on the anniversary of the war's end. Admiral Miho Park stood on the observation deck of the most distant human outpost. He was a direct descendant of Commander Una Park and her daughter Nari. The blood of the exile flowed in his veins, just as it flowed in the veins of every human alive. Beyond the viewport lay the edge of known space. The boundary between charted systems and the infinite unknown. Other species might have looked at that darkness and seen emptiness. An end. A limit. Miho saw something different. He saw room to grow. Admiral, his aide said, the survey team reports 3 more habitable systems beyond the boundary. Shall I order colonization to begin? Miho smiled. The same smile his ancestors had worn when they looked at barren worlds and saw opportunity. The same smile humanity had always worn when facing the impossible. Yes, he said. Begin immediately. Humanity had been cast out by a galaxy that feared them. They had built an empire in the shadows. They had returned as conquerors. They had transformed from exiles to rulers. And now they continued what they had always done. They expanded. They explored. They built. They grew stronger. The galaxy had learned a lesson 300 years ago. A lesson written in fire and blood and victory. Never underestimate humanity. Never try to destroy them. Never cast them into darkness expecting them to die. Because if you do, they will return. And, when they return, they will be unstoppable.